few ground rules. I said earlier, maybe not everybody was here. The cafe's open. There's burgers in there and drinks. We'll probably be here for a couple hours tonight. The restrooms are back this way. So if you need to use those, they're for you. There's a few seats right down here next to the fire. Dave, you go by me. I guess I better introduce myself. I'm Jeff Clemens. The Clemens family has run the livestock market here for nigh on 60 years, and we welcome you here tonight. We started a tradition here on sale days a while back. And before I introduce our moderator tonight, I'd like to carry that tradition on. So if you guys would, we're going to pray. Lord, we first say thank you for doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Thank you for this great country and lots of cattle. Your word promised us that the end times would be very exciting. Well, here we are, and it's pretty darn exciting. My simple cowboy prayer tonight is this, Lord. Grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the godly wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Amen. Thank y'all for that. I'm not sure if that prayer makes any difference on cattle prices, but it sure helps us feel better when we go into the sale that we've been into. I'd like to ask my friend Frank Irby to kind of be making his way up here, and I'm going to turn over the mic to him. He can give you his impeccable credentials as our moderator tonight. And by the way, there will be no mute button tonight. But just so you know, there is an automatic timer on the AC and the light set for about 8 o'clock. I think Todd Clemens had something to do with that. We set the timer to correlate with cattle prices, so it may go off earlier. Mr. Frank Irby is going to be our moderator tonight. Thank y'all for coming.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity to act as your moderator this evening. I'd like to recognize Jeff and Todd for allowing and hosting this in their facility. It's really nice to allow that. Welcome all of you that are here. It's nice to see such a good turnout. We have 3 organizations that are going to present tonight. And all 3 of the organizations, we have agreed on how we're going to do this. The first thing we did was a luck of the draw presentation, and Jeff Clemens helped me on that. He was the one who drew the numbers, so if you don't like it, blame Jeff. We originally said we were going to do 25 minutes, but since we only have 3 presenters, we thought we would go to 30 minutes to give time for some questions, if there are enough questions, that kind of thing. So we're going to give each organization 30 minutes to make their presentation and get questions from the audience. So we certainly encourage participation from the audience. I know there's nothing controversial going to be said tonight. At least that's what I understand. But hopefully we will do this and learn something from it and be cordial to each other as we move through the night. Our first presenter up tonight is RCAF, and that's Bill Bullard, CEO. He will come down and he will do his presentation. So Bill, you would welcome him, please.
Thank you and welcome. So most of you are here tonight because you fully understand that something is wrong with your markets. And we need to delve into what that is. And I submit to you that decades of inattention, decades of denial, decades of neglect, have now rendered your U.S. cattle and beef markets systemically, fundamentally, and structurally broken. And so we need to look at whether that's true. Are the markets fundamentally broken, and if so, then what must we do about it? And so what has been a chronically dysfunctional market for decades is now an acutely dysfunctional market, and you recognize that. And in order to determine whether that statement is true, let's look at some important indices that demonstrate to you that your market is fundamentally broken. I'm going to start with the number of cattle producers in the U.S. cattle industry. Because we began here in the 1990s with about 925,000 cattle producers, and we hit 1994 and we entered the North American Free Trade Agreement. The promise is that if the industry stayed on course, if you continue to build beef demand and you continue to expand export markets, you would provide yourselves prosperity and you would strengthen the U.S. cattle industry. That's been the promise for decades. It became very acute in 1994 when we entered NAFTA because that was a promise. So soon after NAFTA, we saw an alarming decline in the number of cattle producers in the U.S. cattle industry. And now we're down to 729,000. We've lost, since 1980, over 500,000. Since 1990, since NAFTA, about 200,000. So obviously, the promises of increasing beef demand and increasing export markets, which we did when we expanded the reach of the U.S. beef supply to Canada, Mexico, and vice versa. And so what economists will say about that is that's a trend. And from a trend, you can determine the trajectory of our industry unless we do something radically different than what we're doing today. So number of cattle producers have shrunk at an alarming rate in your U.S. cattle industry. Now let's look at your mother cow herd. Mid-70s, we had over 45 million mother cows in the U.S. cattle herd. And then we had this cattle cycle that used to last 10 to 12 years. And we had a cattle cycle here in the 80s, and then we had 1994, we entered the North American Free Trade Agreement. A promise to you, if you increase beef demand and if you increase market access for your U.S. beef, you would enjoy prosperity in the U.S. cattle industry and you would strengthen the cattle industry. Look what happened with your mother cow herd. We went through an unprecedented 17-year liquidation phase. Very recently, 2014, your mother cow herd fell to the smallest level in over 7 decades. Obviously, the promises didn't pan out. This too is a trend. It's an ever downward trend in the number of cattle in the U.S. cattle herd. Every previous cycle high is higher than the subsequent cycle. In other words, we can map out where this is going unless we make immediate changes to your industry. Now let's look at your marketing outlets. Where you sell your calves. You sell them to feedlots eventually. And we see since 1996, when we started that 17-year liquidation phase of U.S. cattle herd, unprecedented, we also saw an alarming and continuous reduction in the number of cattle feedlots in the U.S. Most of these are the independent feedlots with a capacity of less than 1,000 head. They've been dropping like flies. We've lost nearly 84,000 of them just since 1996, since after NAFTA. So what does that mean to you? It means that when you're selling your calves in this auction yard or elsewhere, you have 83,000 or 75% fewer potential bidders for your calves. And you might think that that might have a negative impact on the competitiveness and the value of your animals. So you're shrinking your industry in terms of producers, in terms of size of your herd, in terms of your marketing outlets, your feedlots. That too is a trend. Trajectory is a downward slope and will continue unless we make radical changes. Now we look at returns to cattle feeding in the United States for 20 years. The dark line is a trend line. It's a downward trend. And the blue represents the monthly returns to cattle feeding. Over the course of 20 years, USDA data says that the returns to cattle feeding in the United States was a negative $24.70 per head per month for 20 years. You've heard that the cattle feeding business is not very profitable, right? Well, it hasn't been profitable at all. Raises the question, how do we have any feedlots left in this country if this USDA data is correct? This too is a trend, downward trend in the profitability of feeding cattle in the United States. Now let's look at those of you who are cow-calf producers. USDA keeps that data too. The trend from 1996, again, back when we began liquidating the herd, here's your spike in the profitability of your industry in 2014 and 15, and you can see the black line represents the trend line. Your profitability, the returns that you receive on a per bred cow per year basis, has been steadily declining for 2 decades, and will continue this downward trend unless we change this industry's course. Now let's look at your share of the producer's beef dollar. For every dollar a consumer spends on beef, it has to go back upstream in the supply chain and reach the cattle producers. Well, all cattle producers, cow-calf producers, backgrounders, stockers, and feeders, share in the percent of that consumer beef dollar that actually makes it back through the retailer, the distributor, and the packer, and then enters the live cattle supply chain. Back in 1980, you were receiving well over 60 cents for every dollar consumers spend on beef. That percentage has steadily declined over the years, and in 2020, you're about 37 cents. Only 37 cents of the consumer beef dollar is coming back to the live cattle production chain, the supply chain, that has to be shared with each segment of the multi-segmented supply chain. This too is a trend and a trajectory, and we need to figure out how to change it. Now here's a snapshot of your industry. This shows you that for 2010-2020, the red line is your fed cattle prices, 1,300 pounds a steer. And the blue graph represents the price that consumers are willing to pay for beef and are paying for beef in the grocery store. We see in 2010 all the way up as retail beef prices were increasing, consumer demand was increasing for beef. We saw cattle prices follow up in synchrony with consumer willingness to pay for more money for beef. Until we hit 2014. That's when you hit the highest nominal levels in history for the price of your fed cattle, and your cattle prices began to fall precipitously, and consumer beef prices continued to escalate. They escalated for another 8 months after your cattle prices declined. And then they fell all the way down to October 2016, and then in 17 they tried to recover. And so too did the retail prices, but way above. We've never seen a spread as wide as this between the value of beef consumers are paying and the price that you cattle producers are receiving for your cattle. 2017, we see an absolute anomaly, if not a travesty. From 2017 forward, all the way to 2020, we see retail beef prices increasing. Demand for your product has been increasing. And at the same time, we see the value of your cattle decreasing. And every time it tries to reach a high, it falls, and the next high is lower than the one before. We now have a situation where retail beef prices are trending upward, and your cattle prices are trending downward. Folks, that is a chronically dysfunctional market that is now acutely dysfunctional. And why is that? It's because the economic law, the natural law of supply and demand, cannot function if the meat packers control both supply and demand. We have 4 packers controlling 85% of shackle space. Your demand for your live cattle is bounded on a weekly basis by available shackle space. 4 packers control 85%. You have 4 packers who are purchasing cattle outside of the cash market where they are captive supplies. They are controlling and owning. If you add up the formula cattle, forward contract cattle, packer-owned cattle, and the imports, those same 4 packers that control about 85% of shackle space control about 85% of the supplies coming into it. You cannot have a functioning marketplace if the largest meat packers are controlling both the supply and the demand of your product. And so this is your moment in history. This is the time that you decide you're going to change direction or not. If you don't change direction, I've demonstrated to you where we're headed. I know where we're headed. We're headed downhill as an industry. You will continue to shrink. You will continue to lose opportunities for new entrants, young aspiring ranchers to get into this industry, and you will ultimately become a much lower cost producer than you are today because there will be far fewer of you. And you're not in uncharted waters. You've already watched your sister poultry and hog industries traverse this very same path. They are now fully vertically integrated from bird to plate and egg to plate, and that's where you're headed if we don't do something very, very different. So here, we have a structurally dysfunctional marketplace, that has led to concentration and consolidation of unprecedented levels, and then that concentration and consolidation has resulted in vertical integration of supply chains, shrinking competitive infrastructure, fewer auction yards, fewer packers, fewer producers, fewer cattle, lack of market transparency in the industry, increased price volatility like we've never seen before, and cattle prices completely disconnected from the retail value of beef. Those are the secondary tier problems associated with concentrated and consolidated markets, all of which caused by a structurally dysfunctional market. So what do? Well, you can attempt to address the vertical integration, the packers trying to control the entire supply chain, by banning packer ownership of livestock if you wanted to. Or you can address the shrinking competitive industry. Let's figure out how to build more packing plants. Or you can address the lack of market transparency. Let's amend the livestock marketing reporting and require a contract library. If you want to address increased price volatility, let's change the CME limits. And if you want to address this disconnect between your cattle prices and retail meat prices, why don't we figure out a different way to value cattle? Forget about this competitive forces in the marketplace. Let's tie it some way to the price of wholesale beef. So there are solutions to all of these second-tier problems, none of which address the structurally dysfunctional market. And Congress right now is trying to distract your attention from doing what absolutely needs to be done to stop the trajectory of our industry heading in the same direction as the hog and the poultry industry. And then we're supposed to have another slide. Technical break here, just a minute. So, what do? Number one, you have got to restore competition that has been lost to your industry. First and foremost, it's the first thing you must do before you do anything else, restore competition. How do you do it? Number one, you require all beef sold in America to be labeled as to where it was born, raised, and slaughtered. You empower consumers to engage in the competitive art of making choices in the grocery store. And those choices will benefit you because you produce the best beef in the world, you do it under the best of conditions, bar none, and consumers will choose your beef if only they had that opportunity. And so, what's the challenge in trying to do that? Well, here is the meat packers and the National Cattle and Beef Association's formal written statement when they attempted to repeal COOL in 2013. Here's what they said. In short, beef is beef, whether the cattle were born in Montana, Manitoba, or Mazatlan. The same goes for hogs, chickens, and other livestock. Beef is beef. Beef from Brazil, or Argentina, Namibia, Africa, Uruguay, Mexico, Canada. Beef is beef when you tear the hide off it. How many of you believe that? Here's your challenge to restoring competition in your grocery store market with labeling. Here's what the meat packers said in November of 2019. This is not our cap. This is a direct quote from the meat packers. Cargill, Tyson, National Beef, and JBS. Here's what they said. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to come to the last sentence. After the rule, let's talk about country of origin labeling rule. After the rule was repealed, foreign beef no longer had to be labeled as such. That spurred additional imports and caused domestic cattle prices to fall. So I'm not going to make any more arguments about country of origin labeling. Here is what your packers say was the impact of the repeal of country of origin labeling that occurred in December of 2015. Second thing, first, restore your ability to compete in your own domestic market. Single largest beef consuming market in the world is at your feet. You are deprived the ability to highlight your superior product in that market. Second thing we need to do is you need to force the packers to begin purchasing at least 50% of their cattle needs from the cash market that has been shrinking at an alarming rate. And let's look at that carefully. I'm going to go back from 2002. The blue represents the weekly volume in the cash market. 2002, the packers were purchasing up over 60% of all their cattle needs in the cash market. As we saw cattle prices trending upward slightly until 2009, and they increased dramatically. 2013, they really shot up. You saw the packers systematically shifting large volumes of cattle out of the cash market and putting them into the captive supplies, formula contracts. And in 2015, when your cattle prices inexplicably collapsed for a year, we saw the lowest volume of cattle market in history, under 22%. And then the entire industry after that understood we've never seen packer margins as wide as we're having now. We've never seen volatility like we have now. And the industry said, well, we need to voluntarily do something here. We need to tell these packers they need to be in purchasing out of that competitive marketplace in order to restore competition. Well, the outcome of 5 years of convincing the packers they had to do it is they increased those cash market purchases by about 4% is all. Had no impact on their ability to continue to ensure that you receive depressed prices in the marketplace. I'm going to go quickly here. Now we're going to look at something very important. We're going to look at the relationship on a weekly basis from 2002 of your live cattle prices. That's the orange. Here they're coming up 2009, 2013, they shoot up. 2015, they fall. 2016, 2017, they just ratchet their way down. The blue represents the weekly volume of formula cattle that the packers hold. Now, if you look at this chart, it looks like a mirror. As you see the weekly volume of fed cattle, formula cattle increase, you see your cattle prices fall. When you see the increased volume of formula cattle, you see your cattle prices fall. There's an inverse relationship between the volume of fed cattle purchased through formula contracts, captive supply cattle, versus the competitiveness of the price of your cattle. So let's look at this close up. Now let's just look at the last 5 years. 2015, your cattle prices were falling, and the volume of the cattle that the packers are purchasing through formula contracts were increasing at the time. And then we see increasing volume of formula, decreasing fed cattle prices, increasing volume on a weekly basis of formula, decreased cattle prices. And then look at this. You put this on a mirror, it looks like a spider on the mirror. Folks, this is a strong correlation. This should suggest to you that we have a serious problem in letting those packers continue to acquire the majority of their cattle from formula contracts as opposed to bidding in the cash market. So the solution is twofold. If you don't do these first two things, everything else is only addressing the symptoms of the problem. They're not addressing the problem. The problem is you have an acutely dysfunctional marketplace that is now acutely dysfunctional, and unless we change it and change it quickly, the opportunities for you are going to evaporate quickly. You're fine. I'm good? You're fine. Okay. I've never been said as well. Thank you. Okay, understood. So the solution is, number one, we have to restore competition in both the beef market and the cattle market. You restore competition in the beef market by giving you the ability to distinguish your superior product that's competing now with the products imported cheaper, undifferentiated from over 20 different countries. Fundamentally, you cannot have a competitive market if consumers cannot exercise choice in the marketplace, which they simply cannot do without country of origin labeling. Second, you need to persuade Congress to pass Senate Bill 3693. That's the Grassley tester bill that requires the packers to purchase at least 50% of those cattle out of that cash market. That would significantly reduce their ability to use those formula cattle in order to leverage your cattle prices down. And there are studies that support this, including USDA. You know, we have studies that show that the reason feeders are accepting this offer to shift volumes of cattle out of the cash market into these formula contracts is because that grants to them timely access to the marketplace, which they otherwise wouldn't have if they're trying to compete in this rather messy competitive marketplace, because that takes work to negotiate a price. So the feeders have been shifting large volumes of cattle out of the cash market and agreeing into these formula contracts for the primary reason in order to assure timely access to the marketplace. In other words, they were suffering from market access risk, not having timely access. You have a perishable product like fed cattle, that certainly has an impact on the negotiating powers between the purchasing packers and the selling cattle producers. Second study showed specifically cash cattle prices begin to be negatively affected when the cash market shrinks below 80%. In other words, there's a study out there that's showing when the packers are procuring only 20% of the cattle, or excuse me, if they're procuring as much as 80% of the cattle from the cash market, that still has a negative impact on the value of fed cattle in the United States. Third study, the use of alternative marketing arrangements, these are captive supplies, these are forward contracts, formula contract, grid pricing, is associated with lower cash market prices. That's your own 2007 GIPSA study, the Grain Inspection Package Safeguards Administration. Here's another study. When the cash market shrinks below 50%, then the fed cattle market price can be depressed to the monopsony level and maximum market power exerted. And finally, we have a 2014 report of investigation that the USDA did, and they said that in 2009, when the fed cattle cash volume was all up at around 40%, at that time, that had the impact of reducing fed cattle values by as much as $33 nationally, by over $50 in the Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma market, and over $40 in the Kansas market. In other words, if we do anything less than 50%, we're not doing enough, because you can't stop this trajectory by making a minor tweak, because you don't have a minor problem. Your market problem is fundamental, it's systemic, and it's structural. And folks, there's only one way we're going to change that, and that is if we organize to do it. Those who brought us here are not going to lead us out. Those who brought us here are accomplishing exactly what they set out to do, and that was to create greater efficiencies in your industry, cause you to tighten your belts as tight as you can get them, and to provide the meat packers the ability to continue to convince you all you need to do is increase beef demand and increase market access for exports, and you will grow in prosperity. And I want to show you something on this chart. From 2012, as your prices were increasing, to 2018, you accomplished exactly what you set out to do. You increased beef demand by 15%, according to the National Beef Truck-Off Program. 15% increase in beef demand. 2018, you had all-time record high exports, both in terms of value and volume. And what was your reward as cattle producers for accomplishing exactly what the industry's been telling you to do for 30 years? They've been telling you to do one and one thing only. Increase demand, increase market access for exports. What was your reward?
Low prices.
Low prices. Prices in 2018 were below 2017. Folks, this is a broken market. This is your market. And we need to stand together to change it. And there's efforts underway to help us accomplish that. One of which, of course...
You're up to 20 minutes. You want to join in?
Okay, thank you. So we're going to stop there and open up for questions. So we'll have 10 minutes for questions.
I have a mic here. If anybody's got a question, before the questions that you're rolling around in your head, I want to make sure you know that the views expressed tonight may not necessarily be the views of the management here, okay? We're just hosting the event, hoping you get information that you can use so that you can change the things you can and maybe let the things you can't go on. Everybody okay with that? Okay, now we've got a question time, a few minutes. If anybody's got a question, I want to bring the mic to you. Don't be bashful.
I'll ask a question. If I ain't bashful. You ever seen a politician be bashful? I'm just a layperson. I'm not a county manager, but it appears to me, when I've tried to keep up with this as much as I could, because agriculture is very important to us here in Okeechobee, but it appears to me the contract purchases help the big guy. The little guy that's only selling, what, 5, 10 a week, something like that, is the one that gets hurt the most in this. Do I grasp that correctly?
I believe you do. There is nothing inherently wrong with contracts, forward contracts. They can create efficiencies. But when those forward contracts are controlled by four packers controlling 85% of the market, and to the extent that gives them leverage over the price that everybody receives for cattle, then they are devastating. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the packer owning their own cattle, unless they are big enough that by owning those cattle, they can leverage the prices. And then that's an absolute disaster. So there are degrees to this, which is why the efforts in Congress have been very clear that they tried to identify the largest packers to be subject to these restrictions, including the 50% procurement practices. It will only apply to packers that own multiple plants. So it does not affect the small regional packer, and we need more small regional packers. But that's a very important point you just made. Thank you.
Got a question, Matthew?
Yes.
Bill, thanks for the speech, that was very good. Can you tell us why we're losing so many small farmer feedlots that are under 1,000 yet? And you have the big farm with big lots, over 1,000 seem to keep going. If nothing else, they just change hands and keep moving the ownership.
Okay, so here's where we're back to that chart for the returns to cattle feeding. Now, the largest feedlots with capacities over 50,000 head have increased significantly over the past several years. We now have about 74% or 74 of them. And those very large feedlots control about somewhere around 30% of all the cattle. So these small farmer feeders, the independent feeders, they only control and feed about 13% of the fed cattle that goes to the packers that control 85% of them. And so these very large feedlots, you have to ask the question, how is it that they can stay full, as Vaughn said? How is it that they can continue to operate if the USDA data is true that the return is a negative $24.70 per head per month for 20 years? That does not support a profitable industry. So it raises the question and the concern that we have. Are there sweetheart arrangements out there where the meat packers are preferring some of these large formula feeders and giving them more than what mandatory livestock reporting is actually reporting to us and that USDA uses to calculate these numbers? You can't have a profitable industry if this data is true, if these data are true. Something's wrong. You just can't do it. So the answer is, we don't know the answer to the question, which is why we fully support the investigation going on by the USDA and the Department of Justice to determine whether or not there are agreements underlying the written agreements or the verbal agreements that are giving these largest feedlots the ability to insulate themselves from the volatile marketplace itself. We don't know the answer to that. We've suspected that for a while. We've asked Congress to look into that.
Got another question? The floor is still open.
I do.
Okay.
So you're suggesting, just like when we had $8 hogs, some of those big hog feeders had ledger contracts where they got $60, and when the price was low, then they just adjusted, which gave the industry, the hog industry, time to wipe out all of the small hog producers. So then back to what this gentleman here said, in Pickett Tyson, remember that case, didn't they argue that the big packing plants were getting the best price of the week plus a nickel, but the small guy with the trailer load set the price? Is that correct?
So there certainly is a correlation between what happened to the hog industry back in the late 1990s. Over the course of about 25 years, we saw the number of hog producers fall from 250,000 down to about 60,000. We wiped out 75% of all those pesky hog farmers in the U.S. hog industry, and that's exactly what the packers wanted, because 68,000 hog producers are allowed to manage 250,000 hog producers. So that shrinking, the skeletalization of the supply chain is what occurred in the hog industry. In 1998, it came to a head with 8-cent hog, 20-cent hogs. And what you found is those larger hog feeders who did have contracts with the packers were able to survive with prices up at the 30 cents per pound as opposed to the 80-20. And they survived while the others fell by the wayside. And that was almost an overnight takeover of the hog supply chain by the vertically integrated meat packers. And we're on the same path. Why wouldn't they apply that model to your industry that they have so perfected in the hog, the poultry, and the sheep industries?
Okay, I think our moderators, we got about 3 minutes. I think we've got 2 questions.
Oh, man. Will these people identify who they are when they're speaking in
Okay, good idea. Thank you, Wes. Just give your name and who you are, if you don't mind, before you ask, when you ask the question. Okay, we got one right here.
I'd like to know who the last two are.
My name is Dave Wright, and I'm from Nebraska. Okay? And in the, huh?
Welcome to Okeechobee.
Thank you, but in Nebraska, we lost all of our hog producers. I mean, just, they got wiped out. And Bill's right, it was literally overnight. They were just done, because they couldn't get any shackle space. You know, but the Sands and them guys, they survived. They had ledger contracts, you know, that kept them in that margin. But as soon as they got done with the little ones, then they started working on the big ones, because now Sands is gone.
All right, we're speaking on behalf of any organization.
I'm part of OCM.
Okay, and the gentleman that was over here, who was he speaking on behalf of?
I'm Lon Blair from South Dakota, and I'm president of
Okay, okay.
All right, we got one more here, real short.
Yeah, my name is Mike Schultz. I'm from Brewster, Kansas, cow-calf operator. Been on the board with RCAF, served with OCM too. I actually founded the Kansas Cattlemen's Association in 1998, competed against KLA. So, Bill, just to explain to these people too about the difference with competing proteins with some of the packers that are in the beef industry, the pork industry, and the chicken industry, how does that affect our industry and the cattle industry? Those have competing programs.
Yes, we argue when JBS tried to purchase Pilgrim's Pride that chicken was an alternative protein source that could compete with U.S. beef if the relative price of chicken fell below, the consumer's price point on beef. And so there's data that USDA collects that shows that there are substitute products out there already, not to mention the fake beef. There are substitute products out there, and when the packers control all four of them, it raises concerns that they may be playing one commodity against the other, knowing that if their cattle prices are too high, they could reduce the price and increase the volume of poultry, and that would cause consumers to shift purchasing from beef to poultry. So yes, that's a big issue. I wanted to say one thing, that there's going to be another meeting in Florida on January 30th at the Columbia Fairgrounds on January 30th. So if you have more questions, you can bring them there. Thank you.
Right on time, Mr. Mueller, thank you. I like Alan Walker. I'm not in the cattle business, but a guy I used to work for several years ago when I was in the hospital business, if we showed him those trend lines in that business, all he would say is, you have decided you're going out of business, that you haven't determined when. When all your businesses are, when your business has trends like that, you need to do something to fix it. Because if not, you will continue that downtrend, and as the gentleman over there said, pork business, it'll change dramatically how you live and how your family lives. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Chuck, you want to come on down? Chuck Hiker with USCA. He is Beaumont, Texas, a cow-calf operator. He too was trying to figure out how to get over here without falling off into the auction pit. So take that mic over there, Chuck, if you would. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the trip. So if y'all would please give Chuck a welcome. And I'll turn it over to you, Chuck. I gave you a notice of 20 minutes. And if you want to try to take questions or continue on, I'll give you another 20 minutes. Thank you.
How y'all doing? This morning in Beaumont, Texas, we were looking at our third hurricane. We just barely missed the first two where I live on the west side of Beaumont. And we got the good ways from this one. But y'all are real familiar. The reason I'm here is because I'm real familiar with this kind of area, this kind of weather. We get 70 inches of rain on a regular basis. 2 years ago, we got 43 in one night. It was bad. You can't imagine how bad that is. I'm from Beaumont, Texas. You're wondering why I'm here. I was one of the founders of USCA in 2007. served as the vice president. John Wooster was the president. And we formed USCA to kind of do some follow through on country of origin labeling. We were doing a lot of work on animal ID. At that time, they were trying to get it implemented. It looked like there were several organizations, particularly from my state, that wanted to turn it into a funding source. USDA wasn't really crazy about that. We certainly weren't. You talk about expensive for cattle producers to have to buy all their tags and their software and everything. It wasn't going to be a good deal, and we kind of got that turned around. USDA did have a database. As most of you know, we still don't have a national animal ID system, and we're still surviving. I'm not totally against national ID, but I certainly wasn't for letting it be a funding source for a policy organization. A little background on me. I've been in the cattle business since I was or my family has since I was a little kid. I probably bought my first show cows in high school. Started buying cows when I got out of high school. I was roughnecking and put myself through college and bought cows. And when I got a degree, the funny thing is most people think I have an ag-based degree. I was in petroleum engineering at Texas A&M. Graduated from Lamar University. I'm gonna need water, I can tell you that. And I started rice farming. I had about 100 cows, and I just never looked back. The sad part of that is, when I would go to meetings in my 20s, I was the youngest person there. In my area, I'm still one of the youngest people there. You know, look around here, it's the same deal. As I rode down the road coming here from Tampa, beautiful cows, beautiful country, lots of grass, lots of places for sale. Y'all are going through the same things we are. The closer you are from Tampa, I'm sure you can't even touch that land for pasture or anything anymore. The urban crawl's killing us. Well, there's a lot of problems in the cattle industry. And USCA is one of the few organizations representing just cattle producers. I'm not an anti-NCBA person. I sat on the NCBA board in the 90s. Went to some of their leadership training courses. I was on the Live Cattle Marketing Committee. I know most of y'all have read about the Live Cattle Marketing Committee this past summer session. We had the same ones in the 90s. It was very controversial, very tense, and it was over the lack of money. Cattle producers hadn't been getting enough money ever since I can remember, which that goes back to the early 80s. I started feeding my own calves in the late 80s when I figured out that my calves, my heifer calves, were worth 60 cents at the sale barn, and they were selling for 61 cents when they were killed, and the cost of gain was 30 cents. I started feeding. They had a ranch to rail program in Texas, and you could feed 5 head. I've been doing that a couple of years, and it was funded by the checkoff. They kind of did away with it because it wasn't supposed to be. They deemed it illegal. That was kind of a Packer-induced deal too. They didn't want a lot of people learning how to feed cattle at smaller ranchers. The one thing I've never understood here is how in the heck I have to ship my calves 900 miles to Amarillo, and I live in Beaumont, Texas. What is the freight on these cattle when they get to a packing plant or a feedlot? What's the closest feedlot here? Does anybody? Nobody knows? Do they go to Texas or the Midwest? Where? Midwest, Oklahoma?
There's one in Florida.
There's one in Florida? Well, I'm going to start with my slide. Give me a slide, Joe, so I don't get off. I usually just stand up and go to talking and don't quit. There's some, U.S. Cattlemen is just an organization that represents cow-calf producers. We're based in Washington, D.C. That's kind of where we started. We believe in the democratic process. We believe you have to go to D.C. and you got to stand toe-to-toe with people that you don't agree with. If you got a problem, you got to go there and tell them what your problem would shock you the number of legislatures that have no clue about what goes on in any of agriculture, much less just the cattle industry. There's lots of issues, particularly senators. The senators from Texas, it's about high-tech industry, the oil industry. We're way down on the totem pole, folks. And a lot of those folks would love to help you, but you got to give them a solution. We're member-funded, member-driven, only producer organization based in Washington, D.C. Our number one policy priority is the cattle producer's bottom line. That's extremely important being in Washington, D.C. You've got to make friends. They have to know you. You've got to learn how that democratic process works, and you got to be able to walk in there and they know who you are, and they trust you. You start learning things when people trust you, and they have respect for you. You don't ever throw anybody under the train. It's just like you treat people from your hometown. Same way in Washington, D.C. That's how you get things done. That's how we manage to get things done. You don't have to have a big pack. It does help, but you don't have to have a big pack. I did a meeting with Michael Conway. He was chairman of the House Ag Committee. Now he's minority leader. It was a random meeting, but he came in because he knew I was there. And I was one of them that really worked hard on country of origin labeling. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Chuck, you know where I'm from." He was from cattle feeding country. The cattle feeders were one of his biggest supporters. He said, "I can't help you on this, whether it's right or wrong. I can't help you on this." And that's, when you gain that respect, then when I need something, I can go back in and sit down with that man and talk to him. Something like the 50-14 rule. Keep going. I'm gonna run out of time. Some of the things we've done, we don't get into a big array of just, we don't take too big a bite. You accomplish things by taking a smaller bite. We submitted a petition for rulemaking on product of the USA loophole. USDA admittedly admits there's a problem. When we lost, we knew when the law was repealed, so was the definition for USB. Anything shipped here, if it's shipped in a package and that package is open and redone, it can be product of the U.S. It can't be born, raised, and processed, but it can be product of the U.S. The one thing I learned, I was on the Cattlemen's Beef Board 12 years, over a 13-year period. I actually served on the operating committee, which allocates the money on the CPB side for 8 of those years. We sat in meetings, industry scan meetings, where the marketing people said consumers want to know where their beef comes from. They want to know everything they can about it, and they'll pay more for it. You know who paid for those? Your checkoff dollars. You know who contracted them? NCBA. Their policy was completely opposite. And they went down to the mat saying country of origin labeling didn't make our beef prices go up. That's bull, folks. Barry Carpenter, who was head of AMI at the time, said it worked. And as you saw on Bill's slides, they're still reaping the benefits because people are still paying the same price for beef as when they were getting the born, raised, and processed beef. Wait, go back. First cattle organization to weigh in on the rising trend of fake meat. I never was real concerned about that. Have any of y'all eaten that? I mean, it kind of took care of itself. I don't know why the big hoopla was about that. Secured legislation to reform livestock haulers' hours of service. We worked really hard on that. Joe Goggins was testifying before a Senate hearing committee on the state of the livestock market and brought this to their attention. And that was one of the first times it had ever been mentioned. And it turned into a really big deal. And it's a really big deal for Florida. Because when you put a load of cattle on, the more times they have to stop and unload those cattle and let them rest, the more weight they lose, the more injuries, the whole 9 yards. Worked with Congress and USDA to develop a coronavirus aid program for livestock producers. Cattle producers receive over $5 billion in stimulus funding. Nobody likes to take a handout, but I tell you what, folks, when the market was rock bottom, it sure helped. USDA helps out East Texas in several hurricanes. We got money for dead cattle, we got the money for rebuilding fences from FEMA. It's good to have an organization in Washington, D.C. looking out for you that has friends that can go to the right places to ask for it, because it's there. Worked with Congress to introduce several bills related to increasing transparency and true price discovery in the cattle marketplace. That's where y'all taking the bull by the horns. These are the meetings that y'all are going to make a difference. When y'all start calling your congressmen, when we go to meetings in Washington, D.C., and y'all have called them, they're like, yeah, we've had constituents call us about that. That's what gets those kind of laws passed. Establish the Independent Beef Processors Task Force to identify solutions to increase the profitability of regional meat packers. Again, the more competition you have for those cattle, the higher the prices are going to be. The 5014 or spot market bill, I think we have the votes to win that in the Senate right now, folks. That's why it's important for that to happen now. If you ever listen to Corbin Wall, does anybody ever listen to him? He always has really good commentary on what's going on with stuff like this and what's going on in the market. You can go to DV Auctions website, but it's a really good commentary. He's a friend of cow-calf producers. They've had some other bills. This is getting a lot of attention, the Cattle Market Transparency Act and the Price Act. Mandatory price reporting reauthorization happens on December the 11th. That's when the program expires. That's why it's important that we do it right now. Product?
You want to go back?
No. I didn't realize you'd switch. Product of the USA loophole. It's the same thing I was talking about. Due to the repeal of cool in 2015, there's no clear definition for what constitutes a beef product. We can't let that keep going. We need to get cool back, but we've got to fix this too. Consumers will pay more for the beef. They're already doing it. One of the greatest things that happened in the whole coronavirus deal is people quit going to restaurants. They started cooking. Guess what's really easy to cook? Beef. And people like cooking beef. You can grill it, the husband can cook it, but it's unbelievable some of the things we're finding out that's happened as a result that are positive. No, I don't think it's good we had the disease, but it is good that people are at home and they're cooking, spending more time with their family, and they're enjoying beef. We can go on to this. I'll talk about it. USCA petition addressing alternative proteins. We got a lot of people to sign on saying that it was on what they were going to call the non-beef or fake beef. Again, it's my opinion, and you're going to get a lot of my opinion. That thing kind of took care of itself. I think I've tried one, but it wasn't any of the fancy ones they have out now, and it was kind of like eating a dog biscuit. I just had a hard time. I don't know, somebody really wanted to be a vegetarian to eat one. Go ahead. Modernize the beef checkoff. The beef checkoff is the strongest when U.S. producers are engaged and empowered, and that's one thing USDA members did. We worked. We went and sat down with USDA and said, how do we get people on the Cattlemen's Beef Board? How do we get people in state beef councils? And they showed us. We got most of the people that were our officers on the beef board. We got folks that weren't NCPA members on the beef board. You just have to know how to do it. You go sit down, let people know you want on, engage them, and you get in the room. Until you get in the room, you're not going to change anything. You have to go to Washington. You have to go to these national meetings. And you folks need to start sending some of these young people that are here trying to be in the cattle business. That's how they're going to learn the other end of raising cattle. And it's not just about how good your calves are. You've got to get something for them at the end of the day. So somebody from your area is going to need to start coming to some of these meetings, going to need to engage to bring back to this area what's going on and what y'all need to do and who you need to call to make it happen. On the checkoff, we've worked on this. You can imagine how long we've worked on this. We even had it teed up to fix, but nobody believed in the fix. But The separation of the Federation from NCBA, that needs to be done. You can't keep checkoff dollars in-house. Improved efficiencies and enabling change. The way the law is written, it almost has to go through the legislature to get any change. You can modernize the checkoff under the Big Modernization Act of 1998, I believe. But there's a generic act out there that most commodities are falling under now that we tried to change beef over to, and that sunset the old one, and it didn't work. But under that checkoff, producers can actually change it. Direct contracts. The CBB needs to be able to contract directly with the vendors. It doesn't need to go through a national organization. The implementation for what NCBA alone contracts is running around $8 billion of your checkoff dollars of your 40 or so $1 million budget. If the CBB can contract directly, that would be much more efficient. Okay. The industry operates best with informed and active participants. Again, this is how you engage. You find out what's going on. You find out what you need to do. You need to get someone from your area to engage, or several people from your area. You need to come to fly-ins. We have fly-ins. When you go to a fly-in, it's all set up for you. You have a little itinerary. You even have white sheets that just one-pagers that kind of tell you what each issue you're going to discuss. You don't do one or two, maybe 3 issues. When you go into a congressional office, a lot of times you never see the congressman or the senator. You're talking to aides. There's kids there that are 21 to 25 that make more happen than the congressional members themselves, particularly on agriculture. And then you get into an ag office where they're from an ag area. Then you get the congressman or the senator in there. But there's so many areas that have no ag in it, they have no clue what it is. But you gotta go sit down and see them, because then they remember you. Then when a bill comes up, they'll say, yeah, those folks were in here 2 weeks ago. They're supporting that. And the congressman votes for it. With that, I'm gonna say thank you. Do I need to burn some more time, tell a joke or something?
You're like 20 minutes, so you got time for questions.
If anybody got any questions, you can ask me about anything. I'm pretty fluent on the checkoff. I was on it a long time. And a lot of people ask me questions about the checkoff. You'd be surprised how many producers have no clue what it does. It's a really good program. It's done a lot of good for us. I'll admit there's some flaws in it. It's sold a lot of beef for other countries, but beef demand is way up. Yes, ma'am. Question here.
Hey, I'm Lisa Slinky. I'm from Rockland, Florida, and I'm a third-generation cow cattle. My question about beef checkoff is this: why are they over in these foreign countries promoting our beef that's being exported over there, but they're taking a buck a head from every one of us? They're starving to death and not promoting our beef in our country. I have a huge problem with that.
Actually, they are.
How?
Google beef recipe. Google. You can get a what do you call it, a little screen deal that shows you how to cook. I mean, it'll do a video, a YouTube. They'll do a YouTube on how to cook anything. When you see stuff like the food pyramid, we have researchers. That's a fight for each one of those foods: the breads, the carbohydrates, the fish, the poultry, the vegetables. All of those commodities fight over their spot on that food pyramid group. Your checkoff dollars fight for red beef to stay on that food pyramid and up there high. We had to quit doing television ads just because of the sheer expense of it. But they do lots of women's magazines. They do television shows, and a lot of times you don't see it's done by the beef checkoff, but the background information did come from beef checkoff funded resources.
Juan Mayer from South Dakota, County. I think Lisa's question was, though, how do we promote US beef? When we got foreign importers coming in, like you said, all they gotta do is pull the wrapper, re-wrap it, and put it on. You know, and that foreign import is also being used as a captive supply against us in our markets. The totals this year will be about 3.2 million pounds of that foreign beef coming in, which on a carcass basis relates to about a little over 1 million cows. I think it's 1,052,000 cows and that's being used against us. And that is, you know, we can't call it. Our checkoff in the act and the order says that you cannot use US beef in the United States and advertise it at all. It has to be generic because the importers pay $1 too. We can't discriminate against them. So I think that's her question. You expound on that. Thank you.
Well, it's generic. You cannot promote any country's beef. It's generic. That's the title of it. Vaughn was on the Cattlemen's Beef Board with me. That's just one of the downfalls of it. That's why we got that little deal in there about promoting change on the checkout. Sir, did you have a question?
Yeah, Matt, I was just going to follow up on that. How much is the export? My name is Matt Pierce. I'm from Okeechobee, cow-calf producer. How much of the export market is related back to a cow-calf operation for that promotion of beef overseas? If we took away all the exports, like she's suggesting, what would that take away from the calf coming across the ring?
Man, I don't have any number what that is. Most of the, dude, go ahead, well tell me. 'Cause I'm,
the studies I've read show $325 per head. That's the added value in the export market. So, I mean, are we willing to take away that much money from the cow-calf operation? I mean, unless somebody else has got another figure.
so how do you stop imports? All right, maybe I missed your point. What are you saying?
My point is if we do away with imports and we just do domestic beef, that's going to cut away our export market and the value that we're at. Because she was talking about all the product that we export, why we didn't keep it in-house. That was my comment, not about the imports.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand the question. The reason, most of what we import is trim, folks. You know, you've got some small outlying yields of grass-fed beef, but most of what we bring in is trim. They make hamburger out of it. That's the most that's sold in the U.S. today is hamburger. And so the stuff we export is usually stuff that we don't eat here, just like in Mexico. They ship the guts for tripe. I think Russia gets kidneys. Tongue goes to the Middle East or the Asian countries. I'm not sure. But, I mean, I don't know that you want to disrupt the entire marketing mechanism we have because there's an efficiency to being able to export and import. We are a high-end palate. We like the steaks, we like the skirts for the Mexican food, but there's a lot of the stuff, the roast, they can ship to a lot of other countries. They make sausage out of a lot of the beef from the U.S. that goes to these other countries. But that's why we don't really want to give up. Our exports are carrying us right now. And if we ever get China open, I know all of you have heard that. I just read where they finally took a load of rice. I'm a rice farmer too. I can't tell you how many years they've been telling us when China starts buying rice, you got it made. I've watched everybody around me go broke, including me, waiting on the rice market. So anyway, I don't know that we want to hammer import. I think you stay focused, you find things that you can get done, they're realistic. Stopping imports is not realistic. Getting country of origin back is realistic, but it's a big fight. We're going to have a big surge from the country to do that. I think the consumers would love it. There's a lot of money paying a lot of politicians to be against it. And you do, you know, that's part of it. Money, it's about money. We're a net exporter. Yes, we consume way more beef than most other countries, but I mean, Wait a minute, it depends on the year and the value of the dollar. We might have, but it's not by much, and it depends, it fluctuates with the value of the dollar.
Thank you, Mr. Geiger.
I would like to know what.
Okay, we have one more question.
John Williamson, cow-calf producer in Okeechobee. Where does the U.S. Cattlemen Association stand on the referendum on the beef checkoff?
We are not opposed to a referendum in any way, shape, or form. If we could do it, I would say do it tomorrow. I don't think it'll pass. I don't think you're gonna do away with the beef checkoff. You know, they can almost tell you right now today who's gonna be president with surveys and everything. And they are pretty confident on the surveys they have that the beef checkoff is not gonna fail under a vote. And I was from Texas, they just voted, we voted 2 years ago to increase it $1. Texas gets $2 total now. And it was really scary how many people didn't even vote, to be honest with you. But it was unanimous. So, we are opposed to a referendum. I don't see the need for spending a lot of money to do it, because I personally don't think it'll pass. I mean, if everybody wants to vote, just have it.
Thank you, Mr. Geiger.
Thank you all. Please keep doing this and having people in and figure out and give some input. The biggest thing is give input and make sure you talk to your congressional members and they know who you are. I'm just trying to make sure I don't get off. I'll have those little
Our next speaker is Mike Egan with the OCM. He is an executive director. When I talked to him earlier this afternoon, he said he had I think your full board with you tonight. And each one of us is going to have a small part of their presentation. So I will turn it over to Mr. Egan, and you can introduce your board, and you've got 30 minutes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here this evening, and I got to tell you, I feel quite at home as I'm traveling across the country and I see black and white. I'm a dairy guy, 7th-generation dairy farmer, sold 4 years ago. Kind of in that same market. The chicken guys, consolidated, and dairy's heading in that way. We're here tonight because we're fearful that the cattle market's going in the same direction, and we felt it necessary that the entire board of OCM from all across the country come here and be a part of this conversation here this evening. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let them, if you guys can stand up, just announce yourself, your name, and the state. We'll start with that. So just go ahead, just one at a time.
Joaquin from California.
Nice and loud.
Marty Irby, Washington, D.C. I'm a lobbyist in D.C.
Red Stokes from Porterville, Mississippi. I'm a cattleman from Mississippi.
Jonathan Buckner from Northeast Alabama, President of Alabama Country Poultry Growers, Director of OCM.
Dave Wright, Nebraska. And yes, I came down here because I left 8 inches of snow and 5 degrees. When I got off the plane, I thought, man, we're back in Nebraska in Hayfield.
Mike Weaver, I'm a cattle and poultry producer down in West Virginia.
Mike Schultz, cow-calf producer from Brewster, Kansas.
Lon Meyer, cow-calf producer from South Dakota, and I'm down here because it was a -2 in the morning I left.
And I'm Dustin Kittle. I'm legal counsel for OCM, a registered gelding cattle operation, and we have an agricultural law firm. And this is my associate, Ashley Hoser, of Columbia, Tennessee.
Thank you. Thanks for the board to do that. So you'll hear from a little bit of them just in a little bit. But if there's any question as to what we stand for as an organization, I can tell you we stand very strongly on country of origin labeling. We stand with choice on checkoff. We are for the referendum. We would love to see PHTSA reinstated. And the reality of vertical integration, it's real, guys. It's real. And so I'm going to kick it off. Let Jonathan Buttram speak first. Jonathan and Mike both have experience in the poultry industry.
I'm a third generation poultry farmer. I've grown 45 years and over 54 million chickens hands-on. I say probably more than any other person in the United States, hands-on. We started growing, we built our first houses in around 52, my daddy did. And farming 1 year. Then it come along, we could make full contracts, make good money. Then we decided later on that we would go contract, but we would never make any more money after that. Now then, 2 of those houses, we built them for $8,000 a piece, cost $1 million for 2 of them. And you never get them paid off. And you go through hell while you're doing it. My wife was terminated basically for me in a restaurant in Ohio, chicken restaurant. She was terminated for Bible security reasons. She's in Alabama. We're in Ohio. How can you do that? But anyway, they targeted my children too. They can't grow chickens. I had a clean-out business. They targeted my chicken clean-out business, which supported my cattle operation. And then I was doing suicide counseling for chicken farmers. I just took it on over the last 20 years being president of Alabama Country Poultry Growers. I pick up my Bible and go, when they call me, and talk a lot of people out of committing suicide. The integrators has their finger on torturing them. So I spoke in New York last year about all the news outlets. Spent 2 weeks up there. And when the chicken companies found out I was doing suicide counseling, they called all the growers up and told them, do not be calling him anymore for counseling. A farmer called me one day, and he was distraught. He said, they told him just to kill himself. I knew this guy, he told me he wouldn't lie. And then another guy sat in the car with him a couple of weeks ago. He was crying. His wife got stage 4 cancer. The chicken company has got their thumb on him, trying to take everything he's got. And he wanted me to contact the senator to beg them to leave him alone until his wife dies. As soon as you're chickenized, and believe me, you're going to be going through this same stuff that we're going through. Our farm went from 1,000 cow herd, 14 chicken houses, 1,400 sows to nothing. We're done for because I chose to stand up and fight for the farmers across the United States. And unless you choose to stand up and fight with us, you're going to be in the same boat that I'm in. But I'm going to continue to fight for you. They thought I'd go away. A year ago, the USDA came to my house and said, your life's in danger. We buried my daddy 8 weeks ago. 2 days before we buried him, 2 investigators from the USDA, the IG's office, the Inspector General, came and took me to one of my farms that I have left and said, sell this farm and disappear. This is my government. They'll come after you just like they did me if you don't unite. I mean, you can sit here and say, well, I owe too much money. But I'm telling you from experience, suicide counseling, you better unite. That's all I have to say.
John, I'll back up everything that John was telling me. I lived for 19 years. I did poultry for Cody Fry. If you want to get in a situation where they dictate to you what you raise, what you have, what you feed them, how long you get to keep them, what weight you sell them at, and you're doing that under what they call a contract of adhesion, which means it's take it or leave it. If you don't like what they tell you, then you got to give it, or you don't get a contract. that's the way they do things. Once they get you in that situation, you know, they lie to poultry farmers so badly, try to get them to build houses, well, I'll just give you an example. The last prospectus I've seen where they were trying to get growers to do that, $60,000 a year more than I ever. That's how bad they lie. Over and above paying their expenses and everything else. I'm telling you, we don't have time to, I can go for an hour, really. And we don't have time to do that, but just pay attention to what's going on here. Don't get yourselves in a contract situation. You'll never be able to outlive it or pay yourself out of it.
Yeah, thanks for everybody coming. My name is Mike Schultz again from Brewster, Kansas, cow-calf operation, family homesteaded out there in the 1890s. I've been kind of radical in the cattle business that I've been sick of. When we started in 1998, we had $58 fat cattle, and so I'm a promoter of the country of origin labeling, big time. I chair the RCAF full committee for a good reason. RCAF's been the only organization. I did found the Kansas Cattlemen's Association. They've kind of been changed a little bit. Cattle feeders are under duress and basically the fear of retaliation. The RCAF case is involved, and so people need a representative group to work for them. We feel that RCAF's doing that. Good people involved. When I go back to country of origin labeling, I just want to tell you the 1930 Tariff Act, I always believed in that, and it was where that all foreign imports had to carry the mark of origin to the last consumer. It was a good deal if you read about it. It started out a long time ago, and it had a lot of merit. We've lost that because of the force of imports based on the foreign ownership of the meat packers. So they can import product here cheaper than they can buy it here domestically. And that's wrong because it could be now marked with a USA label. So to the end user, it's important. I think our consumer deal, as Chuck said, I've known most of these guys around here a long time, been involved with it. It's important. Everybody wants to use the argument on mandatory country of origin label about the WTO trade ruling. And I want to tell you, I'm embarrassed to say that Kansas Senator Pat Roberts comes from my home state, which he really never lived there. He lives in Virginia. But that guy has sold out the ag industry. Have you heard anything from him in the last 8 months? He didn't say a word. Secretary, he's a Senate Ag Chair. He didn't say one word about what's going on with this trade deal, these imports coming in. So I'm going to tell you a little secret about that. Tomorrow we're going to have another meeting there in Tampa, and I'll do the full series on it. But during the WTO, it could have been arbitrary. We were the only group that supported mandatory cooling. He would not allow us to the Senate Ag hearing. So it didn't set real well. He knows where I am with him. We're kind of on a first name basis. But I will tell you with the WTO ruling, they claim they were damaged. It's a lie. I got charts I can show you. You come up to me afterwards, give me your email address, I'll send them to you. The Canadian cattle market, the Mexican cattle market rose along with the United States cattle prices during mandatory country of origin labeling. And guess what happened after we ended the mandatory cool deal in 2015? Where do you think their prices are? The people from Canada that I know, they tell me the same problem. We have no competition, Mike. We have one buyer, Cargill, the Alberta area. They don't have competition. So they're getting a tank job too because they don't have to compete against buying their cattle. But we're put against producers on both sides of the border. It's wrong in what they're doing, but that's the way it is. 2014 price, I want to ask this question. Everybody talks about trade, okay? All right, who in here, and I've done this for 30 years, has ever received one check for 1 cent for an exported pound of beef or a bushel of grain from a multinational corporation? Raise your hand if you've ever received a check for 1 cent for a pound of beef or a bushel of grain from a multinational corporation that was exported. Anybody? I got people telling me to get this money. I've never seen one. Been in the cattle industry for 45, 50 years. I'm about sick of it. It doesn't happen. You capture nothing on exports. The multinational meat packers capture every penny. It doesn't matter. And so my argument's always been we need to have a separation with the beef industry and the cattle industry. Yes, we're kind of the same, but we're represented by two different entities. So think about that. 2014 prices I've got wrote down here. In my example is this. We received on our 635-pound calves on an average, we got $2.85 a head, about $1,835. 2014, December 22nd. Every year since mandatory cool has been removed, it's cost me over $1,000 a head on my calf prices. And as I told the senator, you cost me $600,000. And I said, if you think I like that, you're a damn fool. And I paid 43% tax. And there's a lot of guys like that. Every part of the industry was making money in 2014, 2013. We got the thing kind of passed and finalized so they couldn't use the multi-country label. It was beneficial. So with that, in 2014, December 2014, the average retail beef price was about $6.53. And I just looked today, the August 2020 retail beef price for consumers in the United States was $7.53 a pound. So you show me where you're getting any of that. Because the calf market's in the shitter. Okay? It's the way it is. I'll tell you, before I go, I'll give you a couple deals here. The ticket IDP case they talked about a little bit, and one of the trade lawyers in that deal was David Dahlman from Nebraska. He made a really good statement, and I want to remind everybody of that because that's why I'm with RCAP. You can choose to legislate or you can litigate. If you legislate, you're going to go convince 435 representatives and 100 senators. We choose to convince 11 jurors and a judge. And we put our own money up. We don't take the checkoff money. And that thing needs revamped. USDA ought to do it. They've been in the oversight committee and it's failed. So with that, I'm going to leave. I'll let Dave talk about the checkoff. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Marty Irby. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm a lobbyist there. I grew up on a horse and cattle farm in South Alabama and managed about a 1,000-acre farm in Sheffield, Tennessee, and we ran about 150 head of Black Angus about 10 or 12 years ago. And I moved to Washington, D.C. to work in Congress, and I was there the day that they voted to repeal country of origin labeling. And I can tell you that 90% of the members of the House of Representatives had no idea what in the hell they were voting on. They did what 3 people told them to do. They didn't even know or understand really what country of origin labeling was. So I saw tragedies like that in our federal government and have been working to help farmers and animals both ever since that time. I think the American family farmer has been treated terribly, worse than probably any sector in America if we're talking about human beings. And I was also asked to give you all an update on GIPSA. I have not worked on that in the past year or so, but lately we've seen that when Secretary Tom Vilsack left, they rolled back the regulations that had come forward and taken a decade to push forward, and the Trump administration, Secretary Perdue rolled them back. I believe they had a proposed rule they released in January, and then 2 U.S. senators, the only 2 farmers that I know of in the U.S. Senate, John Tester from Montana and Chuck Grassley from Iowa, issued a statement very much against that proposed rule. I saw the most recent update was about a month ago. The American Farm Bureau released some information in a report that said that the GIPSA regulations most definitely needed upgrading and strengthening. So glad to be here with you all today and facilitate things and help in any way that we can. Thank you.
Hello, my name is David Wright. I'm from Nebraska. I did I'm a 4th-generation rancher from Nebraska. My sons are 5th, and I got 2 grandsons that are 6th, and the old house we live in is so damn old we can't afford to tear it down. I guess that's ranching, right? So anyway, several years ago, in Nebraska, we have elections to get on the beef council. So we state in the country that has elections. The producers elect you to the position. All the other states have some form of a governor appointment or an organization appointment or something to that sense, but we have elections. So I ran opposed to the checkoff and I got elected. And I served for 4 years. And I ran opposed to the checkoff again and got elected twice. And then Secretary Vilsack put me on the Cattlemen's Beef Board. I'm opposed to the checkoff.
And he put me, I got renominated again. So I spent 14 years on the checkoff opposed to the checkoff. I'm telling you, it's the most corrupt thing I've ever seen in my life. It's a money laundering scheme that would make Al Capone proud. Seriously. You're taking tax dollars, producer paid dollars, and you're funneling it through a system to create clean money to be spent by certain organizations. So, and the checkoff didn't start just in 1985. It started clear back in 22 after the Packers and Stock Fair had, after the consent decree. This stuff the Packers started it. Wilson's the one who started the Federation, which some of you may not understand, or not the Federation, the Beef Industry Council. If you come to Tampa, I'm going to do a longer slideshow on it, so this is kind of a bait as you come. But anyway, what I find interesting about this is we spent, over $3 billion, and this is the position we're in, with beef checkoff. Bill Bullard pointed out clearly demand. We've created demand, but has demand put money back in your pocket? You know, you listen to the corn farmers, and the corn prices were so bad, they kept saying, if we just lower the price, not the farmers, but the commodity traders, if we can lower the corn a little bit more, we're going to finally create demand. And they did. They lowered it enough to where they finally created demand, you know, and now they're riding the upswing on it. But with that said, when I talk about the corruption, and I don't want people to take this wrong, what I'm saying. I want you just to listen and consider. So, all the beef councils around this country, they wind up giving money to the Federation, which is a pay game. They buy seats. And with those seats, they have votes. In like Nebraska, we buy 7 seats. $1.5 million. That's how proud we are. But that money that goes to the Federation goes directly to NCBA. Directly to them. The Federation does not have a checkings account. The Federation is a wholly owned subsidiary of NCBA. That's just a fact. There's only one tax ID number. And to prove this point, there's only one CFO. There ain't a CFO for the Federation, and there ain't one for the policy division. There's only one CFO. There's only one CEO. It's just a subsidiary of NCBA. So when you grasp this idea, when you finally start thinking about this, you start thinking about it's really a checkoff that the Packers started back in 22 to counter the Stockers and Packyard Act, a way to generate revenue. And then you follow the history about how the rates keep increasing. And then when we finally get a federal checkoff, $1 per head, which started out as being, it was like 0.5% per body weight or for the weight of the animal, which nobody liked that, so it's cheaper to go to $1 a head. So how does that work out for you dairy guys that sell those bull feed? You pay a lot, don't you? Right, so anyway, so I did a little research on Florida Beef Council. Florida Beef Council, you guys collect about $644,000 in beef checkoff. You send half of that to the Cattlemen's Beef Board, which is the way they interpret the law, but that's what you do. Then of the other $322,000 that you have left over, you are, according to the 990 for the Beef Council, they have a contract with the Florida Cattlemen's Association for almost $320,000 worth of projects, which is basically most of the money. The Beef Board, the Florida Beef Council, and the Florida Cattlemen share the executive director. They share staff. They share the same building. They have 2 different phone numbers, so I guess the director probably has one phone on one side and one phone on the other side, so he knows who he's talking to, what he's talking about. But it's not just here. It's like that in several states across the country. The NCBA affiliate basically controls the Beef Council. And that's how they wind up getting $10 million a year through the beef councils
to buy seats on the Federation. See how we just laundried that money? We used it to purchase seats. And then the Federation, when you come to doing contracts, you know, millions of dollars of contracts that are spent, that Federation money is supposed to go towards some of the CBD money. Do you know that Federation money can only be spent on NCBA contracts? So I kind of took the dollars, run it through the mill, put it in my pocket, and spend it on my projects. Now what could any organization do, I don't care who you are, if you had $10 million coming in annually in your back pocket? What could you do? So when you go to Congress, I mean, we see the problems that are going on here. We've heard these guys talk about the problems going on here. Who stood in your way for country boards lately? Who stood up and teamed up with Mexico and Canada to take the United States government to the WTO? NCBA. Why? Who fights against ban on patent ownership? NCBA. When you look at this budget, the CBD's budget, CBD spends $9 million on promotion. What can you buy for $9 million from a nationwide promotion? What's it cost to do one ad in the Super Bowl? 30-second ad is $1 million. What are you going to do with $9 million? What you wind up doing is you create a system so the organization that wins the contracts can successfully keep their funding. That's what you do. And they do that through implementation costs. This is a cost recovery system, meaning that the project is to go buy a 6-pack of Pepsi. You can't charge the checkoff more for the Pepsi. You got to charge them only what it costs you. But you're allowed an implementation cost, which allows you to put in your cost to get it done. And then if you're really smart, you'll hire a subcontractor. Because subcontractors don't have to. So you can pay an implementation cost, plus someone else is doing the work, and they can charge what they want. This thing has gotten completely out of control. It was about helping us raise our cattle prices. And it hasn't done that at all. So I'd like to, in closing, I'd like to read to you. You know what the act and the order is. They're really simple. You just get them on you can get them online, and they're not that difficult to read. Five minutes ago, and we'll do some questions. So you might find this interesting. This is the act of Congress. To change the act of Congress, you got to go to Congress and open it up and change it. Would you like to know what the first paragraph of the Beef Promotion Research Act of 1985 is? I'll read it to you. To enable cattle producers to establish, finance, and carry out coordinated programs of research, producer and consumer information, and promotion to improve, maintain, and develop markets for cattle, comma, beef, and beef products. Can you show me what market the beef checkoff has created for you in the last 30 years? Not a one. Boy, we developed more pets. We sure developed so that meat was higher. We did everything we could to make sure them packers could make more money. Oh, maybe that's because the packers started in 1920. Come down to Tampa, I'll give you a little longer version.
We got 5 minutes.
Slow, but I'll
Okay.
get there.
If we want questions, we're going to be shorter than 5.
What's that?
If we want questions, we have to be shorter than 5.
Okay. Well, I'll just say that, we formed OCM 22 years ago. The title implies our mission. We want to bring competition to the marketplace. We're still working on it. 22 years of hard labor,
we have drilled a dry hole, I'm sad to say. But I believe the stars are in alignment right now, largely due to the pandemic, to make some progress. But they're not going to stay that way long. If we're going to fix this thing, we got to move. Oh, okay, sorry. We're going to have to make a move now, or it's over. And we go down the laundry list of things we've decided that we need to do to fix it. The most critical thing, in my view, toward accomplishing those things is to have a spokesman for the cattle industry that represents the industry's interest. We don't have that kind. So we're in the hotel tomorrow in Tampa. Oh, we're heading in. Or to try to solve problems from the podium. We're down here to begin a relationship where we can come together and work together and try to find solutions to this situation so that the independent cattlemen will be here in the future.
No, we're running out of time, so just to summarize this a little bit, I want to thank everybody for coming here. I want to thank Jeff for his facilities here, and we appreciate all you inviting us to come down here. To summarize all the speakers tonight, it pretty much says that we're down 41 million cows in our cow herd. 20% of the beef farms and ranches have disappeared since 1996. 75% of the feedlots under 1,000 head, like I asked Bill, have disappeared. That's just since 1996. 2015 cool packer margins, after they killed cool, went to 84%. The second quarter of 2015, just before they killed it, the packers were making about $17 a head. Recently, we've seen them as high as $700 some a head since the COVID came in, and right now they're averaging in that range of about $500, $450 to $500 in there. And our margins have gone the other way. Where do you suppose they went to? The choke point on this whole thing is like Jonathan and Mike referred to in the chicken business. It's at marketing, and we are right there at that choke point right now. Right now, there's everybody wants animal ID. That will feed right into that vertical integration on that thing. We've got to knock that down on there. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to invite everybody to come tomorrow if you can get away. That's at 11 o'clock, isn't it? The meeting begins there at the 4 Points. Right. I'll let you tell that. Thanks a lot, everybody, and appreciate it.
So we're out of time, but if there's questions, we're here. Any one of us sitting up here would be more than happy to talk. Oh, we got 1 minute? Okay.
My name's Brent Finese. I'm a local cow producer here in Okeechobee. Been on the outside looking in for quite a while before this meeting tonight, and I came tonight and I just see something that I have to call a question to. And that starts off with Mr. Bullard's comments when it comes to Senators Grassley and Tester, who have a bill now. Started out as 30-14, now I think it's 50-14. Of course, it sounds like a good idea to get the Packers price discover on 50% cash negotiated price. If that comes through, my question is how is that going to be regulated? How's it going to be mandated? How's it going to be enforced? Who's going to do that for us? Then I have a follow-up question to that.
Do you want to answer that, Bill? Your question? Okay. I'm assuming it's going to be mandated by becoming a law.
So you're saying the federal government's going to mandate that.
Right, exactly.
And they're going to absolutely regulate and enforce that.
Yes.
Yet our friend from Alabama just told us that we need to look out for our government telling us to sell our farm and move on. So I came tonight with an open ear and a zip lip, but I find a complete contradiction in what was brought tonight. I'm not representing any organization. I'm what Mr. Bull would refer to as an independent cattleman. But I just don't understand that if you invite the government into a situation like this, how we'll ever get out of that. And that's all I have to say.
May I ask you a question? Who do you think the USDA is? Do they
The same group that told the gentleman from Alabama that he's gonna have to
The
sell his
ultimate
farm
two
and
bills
go on.
in there, the USDA will set the price level
It's the same, he said it
by
was your
region.
government.
You know, but whether it comes from USDA or whether it comes from Congress in a bill, it's going to be mandated. And have we had much luck with USDA in setting anything? Most of them are in bed with the other side, I would say our major contractor.
Some people feel that government intervention is a slippery slope.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Can I add one more thing? To check off, we have a referendum going, and it was actually started by LMA. RCAP has picked it up a little to get it pushed and going. And this referendum is not to keep. This is to determine if we get a vote for the first time in 35 years. There's over probably 75% of us sitting out there, not myself, but younger people that have never had a chance to vote on that. And whether you like that or don't like that check off, it's a good chance to vote on it. And if you think it's gonna go the other way, 82% of people approve of this. Let's have a vote and find out. Thank you.
You got one more question?
Yeah, maybe more a comment than a question. First off, I'm disappointed when we went down the list and talked about protein. We did not mention dairy. Most everybody that's local knows that I'm primarily a dairy farmer. We run a small cow-calf herd also. And of course, on the dairy side, we pay them to check off on the bottom 15 calves. And we're big. We participated in promotion projects with dairy and cattle industry. But one segment maybe that has been left out, we talked about the consumer and we've talked about packers a lot. I can also tell you about milk bottlers and processors in a fluid market here in the Southeast. We have had some that have gone bankrupt recently. My co-op, which I've been on the board of pretty much my whole working life, I followed my dad on the board. We were in a packing facility for dairy products, for milk. And it's not an easy business. But the other segment that's between us and the consumer is our grocery store chains, the retail sales. And they are dictating a lot in the dairy business on what is going to be paid to farmers. Recently, we had a move, and we had everybody in the Southeast ready to support an additional overorder premium so that we could keep fresh fluid milk produced in the southeastern United States. My co-op ships out 150 loads of milk a week right now just to supply our customers. And yet, one big, probably the biggest grocery chain, who is also in dairy processing now, kicked it in the head. I think you're going to see the same problems on this beef side. But so don't discount your retail grocery stores as being part of the problem. And that ultimately goes to our consumer, our American Iowa people that visit my farm, look at what we do environmentally and what we do to look after our cattle and our natural resources, and they want to deal. They said, how can I buy your milk? Well, I am a co-op producer. My milk goes to the co-op sales. I don't have a label on my own. Out in the country, I don't have any close consumer. So we're dependent upon not only the processors for beef and dairy, but dependent on the grocery store chain that eventually sets price. Because when it comes down to it, Walmart has succeeded because most customers are looking for the cheapest product they can buy. Doesn't matter what label you put on it, tell them where it's at. Ultimately, and I'm talking fruits, vegetables, tomatoes, Florida is well aware of the pressure on agriculture in general. Not just beef, not just dairy. Thank you.
Yes. If you would, could I just address this just quickly? I'm a fellow dairyman from the other side of the world here. And
We're not that far apart.
hey, there was a change in the pricing system in the federal order on Class 1 that really has affected dairymen all across the country. And it used to be the higher of was the basic price to set Class 1. And you're pretty high percentage Class 1 here in Florida, so that's going to affect Florida dairymen more than it will anybody else in the country, because in my state, our Class 1 is only about 16% or 18%. You're probably close to that, close to 90 or more percent, I would imagine.
And if we retail sales, if we look at a jug of milk, gallon, just to strictly gallon.
Sure.
And look at the gallon price. My grocery store chains locally are probably selling that at something between $45 and $50 a hundredweight of milk. And we started this year around $20, thinking we were going to have a good year.
Right.
Trade issues hit, the pandemic hit, and we fell down to staying under 20.
Right.
Down in the $18 and $19 pay rate.
Right, right. When the cheese market got real high, you still had the old formula that they took away last fall, I think it was, they took that formula away, the higher of formula.
Higher of plus 74 cents.
Well, no, that's the new formula, this
Yeah,
the plus 74 cents, but the old formula would take the cheese market, which got into $25 category, and then that was your basis. And then there's the, you got about a $3 or $4 regional on top of that. You would have had close to $28, $29 milk.
That's right.
But they changed that formula in the last farm bill, and so the higher up, it cost the industry about $400 million nationwide because they did that law change. Now, that was your biggest impact in this state, because we had the same problem over there, depooling. We had some handlers that did not have any emphasis from the depooling. In other words, if you're a handler and you chose to depool, you didn't have to pay that milk price out, because you had to keep that. However, you could pass it on to your shippers. To give you an example, you probably heard of Philmar cheese in California. Okay, that's all they do is cheese. They were paying up to $28, $29 a hundredweight to their producers because it was a cheese market. Now, CDI, that's the second largest co-op in the United States next to DFA, CDI in California, they were only paying about $14 to the producers because they didn't have a cheese market to extract dollars, so they were in the Class 1 market with the problem, and they had a lot of Class 1 in California.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was just about to say, you and I have got a lot of experience with juicers. Most of my friends here are not juicing cows. They would like us to have a private conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you could, I'm sure he'll be glad to have that private conversation with you.
The lights and the air conditioner going off in 2 minutes.
Well, we'll be out of here in 2 minutes, sir.
It won't take me as long to get it off. Beef
Am I losing control of this thing?
Beef checkoff. Y'all kind of beat around the bush. Officially, OCM and RCAP are not just for a referendum, you are against the beef checkoff. Am I correct? I don't see anybody answering. Yes or no, Mark, here. We only got 2 minutes. Yes or no? Are you against the beef checkoff? Because the beef checkoff returns $11 for every dollar that I pay in. Now, I don't know about cattle ranching in Nebraska, but I don't get a return on anything that I spend down here of that 11 to 1.
Okay.
First off, I personally am against the checkoff. I spent 17 years on the checkoff of my state level and 6 years on the CBP. we work to get changes in that checkoff. We work to get USAB, everything. When the hired man owns over 50% of the board automatically, and the other 50% of the operating committee is pretty much the same way on the deal. You aren't gonna make changes. It's become obvious that the only way to do this is if we knock this thing down. But we're not doing that in the first deal. All we're asking is for a vote. And for those of you who still approve it, and there's a lot of people, even some of my family members on there, they can vote to keep it. However, let's just have a vote for the first time in 35 years, the American way on that. As far as the $11.20, it's a big deal.
So
I
for the
personally,
record, you're against big checkoff, am I
I
correct?
am Von Meyer,
Okay,
yes. I
that's-
tried to make
that's all I'm
changes,
saying.
it isn't going to work. We need to
So
start
you're
over at
against the
home.
one that returns the
The producer needs to be at the table on this thing. I personally asked Dr. Kaiser this spring on the thing, what is, I forget which column, but his models for imports were in that. He did not take imports into consideration on that. And how much imports for the deal. He needs to go back and rework it. It is a total waste of money to have that done.
I would address this $11. So I've been on here for a lot of years. Chuck, you know this. You know this, Chuck.
Don't imply that I'm gonna agree with you.
That's great. I want to come out. You guys want to
Okay, guys. Hey, Wes, it's all, okay, guys. It's a civil conversation, guys. We don't need to get mad about it. We have differences of opinion, and that's okay. Again, I'd like to thank Jeff and Todd for offering your facility here, and again, appreciate all you guys coming, RKF, Bill Bullard, USCA, Chuck Hacker, and OCU. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your work. We appreciate that. I'd also like to recognize Jim Parker.